folks. Danny here, presenting a film to show you the effects that identity politics is having on our nation. This video is pretty long. If it's too long for you and you have difficulty watching the whole thing, you can skip to the chapters that most interest you by following the links below in the description below. You could consider this like a video version of a term paper or master's thesis. Here, I will show you some of the ways that one could view identity politics as a fundamentalist religion.
And without the Lord Jesus Christ, you'll go to hell.
Then, we'll see how identity politics is spreading out from college campuses into corporations and mainstream America.
But it is run by identity factions, and few people understand how insane it is.
We'll see how it asserts delusional narratives of victimization.
The dominant narrative on college campuses is that to be a female or to be an underrepresented minority is to be the target of incessant and virtually lethal oppression, because they said they were fighting to survive. They were fighting for their life at Brown. Now, I posit that that's a delusion.
A 52-year-old father of 7 who now self-identifies as a 6-year-old girl. What do you think of that?
While simultaneously dismissing all facts and evidence against it as products of a colonialist mindset.
The whole idea that there's evidence outside of claims of arbitrary power, the postmodernists dispensed with that in the 1970s. That's Derrida.
I'll point to how identity politics is becoming increasingly totalitarian.
My pronouns are not preferred. They're not a preference. They're mandatory for interaction with me. Change your language, like no one is female-bodied, no one is born a girl, no one is any of that.
This is a weapon for a very authoritarian, very intolerant set of attitudes masquerading as compassion.
While its advocates in the media conspire to hide the stories and a wide array of facts that either do not fit with its narrative or will clearly disprove its claims.
Based on race, black people can't be racist since the invasion of the motherfucking body snatchers, which is what white people are. They're fucking aliens. They're fucking parasites. They're fucking soulless monsters. Based on race, black people can't be racist.
As the increasingly fanatical, intolerant ideology of identity politics spreads across our nation, it's important for people on the left, especially, to speak out against it. Many of the speakers featured in this video are on the more conservative side, but that's not because the left is monolithic. Too few on the left dare speak out in opposition to this divisive ideology. To start out, let's begin with an explanation of what identity politics is.
Identity politics is the tendency for people of a particular race, religion, gender, or ethnicity to organize politically around that special interest for the sole purpose of advancing that interest without concern or regard for any larger group or collective. There is a time for identities to come together when they are being discriminated against as a class, but the goal of these movements are only ethical when they seek to remove the political impact of identity, not enforce it. The civil rights movement was not identity politics. It was about destroying identity politics, creating a society where we'd see people as individuals rather than members of groups. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr.,
Because I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
that's not in line with the recent push on the left to create black-only dorms at colleges, or women-only film screenings, or spaces without white people. Nor is it in line with those on the right who believe America should be a Christian-only nation, or want to mandate gender roles, and obviously not those who want a white ethno-state.
So, because the key to the new morality is a method of looking at society and looking in terms of power and privilege. So the old idea of an education is come to campus, we're going to teach you lots of perspectives that you can use, let's look at poverty. What would an economist say? What would a Marxist say? We used to learn a lot of perspectives to look at a single problem. What's happening now is some students, but they're learning one perspective to look at everything. And let's divide everybody up by their race and gender and other categories. We'll assign them moral merit based on their level of privilege is bad and victimhood is good. Okay, now let's look at everything through this lens. Israel, the Palestinians are the victims. So therefore, they are the good and the Jews, or the Israelis, are the bad. Right. So it's this one totalizing perspective. All social problems get reduced to this simple framework.
Do they not realize that Donald Trump's election in 2016 is partly the fruit of those sorts of actions? I know so many people who flirted with voting for Trump, who did vote for Trump, who were responding to his destruction of a kind of political correctness that they find oppressive. And so there's a real relevance to what we're talking about today on campus and who's governing our country right now. And I don't think the people on the left have wrestled adequately with that.
Identity politics as religion is not a new idea.
But a person's identity and life experience often aren't relevant when talking about facts. And they're usually invoked in ways that are clearly fallacious. And many people seem to be making a political religion out of ignoring this difference.
The reason is because you have to see this not as a practical method of addressing problems. It's the dawn of a new religion. Because what you have to see is the campus is there. It's a church. That's right. Wow. And you cannot have blasphemy on campus. And so the best way to understand what happened, I think, is an auto de fe. It's a religious rite coming together to punish the sinner, to punish the devil, and to reaffirm our community.
We have a religion in that there is scripture, and there are questions you're not supposed to ask, and there is original sin. And so, for example, there is scripture. The scripture says that America is based on racism, and that racism is what America is all about today.
What is occurring on college campuses is about power and control. Am I alleging a conspiracy? No. What I have seen functions much more like a cult.
In the religion of identity politics, white privilege is seen as original sin.
In the Church of Social Justice, white privilege is the equivalent of original sin.
It has become a matter of religious faith among educated white people in America to feel a sense of atonement for being racist. I say that it's religious. I don't mean that as a kind of trash talk. I don't mean that as a way of getting attention. I mean that it has become a matter of what any anthropologist who had no pre-existent biases would identify as a religious faith.
Identity politics has Jesus.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, who nobody had ever heard of then, wrote a very cynical article in The Atlantic, basically saying that Cosby was full of... And that was the beginning of Ta-Nehisi Coates becoming treated by all educated people in this country as Jesus.
Identity politics has church, functioning primarily to deal with white guilt.
And so we then had to have had 60 years of white guilt. White guilt is a very specific thing. It is not a genuine feeling of guilt. Nothing to do with that. It is the terror, the literal terror of being seen as a racist.
Identity politics has its heretics, and that is most of us. And identity politics certainly has its disciples. Now let's take a look at some of the extreme events on college campuses that identity politics has led to in the last few years.
Time now for campus craziness, and tonight the title is not an overstatement, it really is crazy. Consider Evergreen State College in Washington. This year, student activists demanded that all white people leave campus or else. Brett Weinstein refused. He's a professor at Evergreen State, and he called the race-based demand, quote, a show of force and an act of oppression. In response to that, here's what happened.
This is not about you.
I'm talking.
This is all about him. On terms of white privilege. This is not a discussion. You have lost that one.
You said some racist. Can you apologize? I did not.
Stop telling people of color they're useless. You're useless. Get the
It seems like in response to this one completely, as far as I can tell, reasonable email, Evergreen College has essentially turned into Lord of the Flies with students running wild.
What? Resign? George Bridges is supposed to be running this school. Why is he allowing a mob to threaten one of his professors?
Dr. Bridges is allowing this mob to effectively control the campus, and they have said that if he does not accept their demands, that there will be violence.
Nevertheless, Evergreen doubled down on its social justice efforts, holding yet another Blacks-only Day of Absence on May 16th, extending the event for a full 3 days. The event coincides with Harvard's recent decision to hold a No Whites Allowed graduation for Black students. Georgetown University followed suit, holding a forum on racism and excluding any white people from attending.
At Yale University in 2015, students became enraged when a university professor advocated for freedom of expression in Halloween costumes.
Okay. So we're sitting here telling you that you are being racist.
Learn that you're privileged, but you're not allowed to have anything contradictory to say. You're just supposed to listen to any black claim that's made, and anybody that says anything about being black cannot be questioned.
It shouldn't be a question as to whether you owe us an apology.
And empathy is not necessary for you to understand that you're wrong.
Let us tell you if you're being racist.
Okay, no.
Actually, that is actually how it works. You don't get a choice here.
I disagree.
It's not a debate.
Do not interrupt me.
Using the word hurt your feelings is not treating you like.
You wait until it is your turn.
Away from
Just
her.
talk louder and look at her.
I'm doing my best.
You were disgusting.
Alrighty then. Great living sociologists in America, Charles Murray, went to Middlebury College in Vermont to deliver a lecture on America's growing class divide, saying, what was their claim against
They had lots of different
exactly?
chants, and none of them were very memorable. They involved white supremacists and eugenicists and white nationalists and that kind of stuff.
I heard one of them call you anti-gay.
Yeah. It's unreal. It's not that people are twisting things you have said. They are making assertions about what you've said that bear no relationship to anything that you have said.
In 2017, a group of crybabies, or crybullies, demanded yet more safe spaces for trans people and people of color. They blocked the main entrance to the university and prevented any white people from passing through.
Look out for Nico, okay? Because he's coming to meet us here. Oh, he started here. This is his first.
So the irony lost on these deluded protesters is that the city of Berkeley and the University of California at Berkeley are probably the most tolerant places in the world for people of color, for transgender and gay students. So how do we get to this point? Where did identity politics come from anyway? It came from postmodernist philosophy, philosophers like Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and Jacques Lacan. What is postmodernism? Well, let's listen to Jordan Peterson.
Here's the postmodern world. It's the Hobbesian nightmare. It's everyone against everyone else, except it's not individuals, it's groups. And you're stuck in your damn group, and it's the only thing about you anyways that's relevant, which is why we might base our hiring on it, for example. And you're oppressed, and even if you don't know it, it's only because you've internalized it, and it's the only thing that's real about you anyways. And I can't talk to you because I'm in my own little silo of privileged belief, and besides, we can't use logic because that doesn't exist, and so you're in a group and I'm in a group, and all we can do is have a war. Or we can talk, but we don't get to talk because you can't talk if you're a postmodernist because speech is just chatter. So when it's just chatter that supports the people in power, that's how they think. And so the whole world is this little armed war of identity group against identity group against identity group. And you shut down people who don't agree with you because why should you let them talk? You don't believe in any of the reasons why you would let someone talk.
Note the irony. Postmodernism has its origin in the philosophy of several white males. It does not come from any indigenous culture, from people of color.
Well, in the midst of this battle, there was a physicist of some renown
His name was Alan Sokal, and he was from New York University. And he submitted a paper to a journal called Social Text, which is kind of the flagship journal of the social constructionist folks. But it was also patent nonsense. Sokal made the whole thing up. What he did was he spent a great deal of time studying the language and jargon of the social constructionist people. And he just put this hodgepodge together of pure nonsense. Almost all the paper was totally make-believe. I mean, the premier intellectual journal of the social constructionists, of the relativists, published something a guy made up. Pure silliness.
And if you want, you can actually make your own postmodern nonsense essay. If you just go to this link here, Identity Politics has left college campuses and taken hold of mainstream America. It's affecting hiring policies in corporations and government agencies, and we're seeing more and more situations such as at Starbucks, where the company feels obligated to do diversity training and sensitivity training based on one minor incident.
More than 8,000 stores will close next month, so that employees can receive racial sensitivity training.
We desire to treat everyone equally, so let's start off with a little quizzing. Let's say a black man walks up to order a coffee. What do, Todd?
Take his order.
Take his order? Rule number 1, never assume someone's gender. Never.
But you said he was a black man.
Yeah, I know he's a guy because I already asked him his pronoun before I called him a him. You gotta be one step ahead. That's what this takes, Todd. That's what this takes.
Hiring standards for air traffic controllers were long among the most selective of all federal jobs. Then, during the Obama administration, activist bureaucrats decided that the pool of air traffic controllers wasn't diverse enough. The FAA now requires many of its applicants to fill out what they call a biographical questionnaire before any other screening. Those who answer the questions in a way that diversity monitors don't like cannot be considered for hiring, no matter how much experience they have or how well they may do on the other portions of the testing.
Just as we are seeing this tyrannical enforcement of newspeak on our college campuses, it is that way within the highest levels of medicine.
Ontario has now passed a law that would allow the government to invade your home and strip you of your child if your little Billy comes home from school one day and announces he's little Sally, and if you have the temerity to tell him that he is not in fact Sally. To remove a child from the home because the government disagrees with basic biology is beyond the pale of the reasonable.
You're saying that at a very deep level, the transgender movement is attacking the order that exists in human nature.
Oh, certainly. If my feelings alone determine who I am, then there really is no such thing as a man or a woman.
Attack on the idea of objective reality comes from postmodernism.
So I got out a textbook. It was called Race, Class, and Gender. And it says, objectivity as found through rational thought is a Western and masculine concept that we will challenge throughout this text.
Yeah, right.
Want to go for irrational.
The PC types have been saying exactly that since the 1970s. The very nature.
Reject evidence.
Let's question the definition of evidence, because the underlying idea, remember, the underlying idea here is that all hierarchies are predicated on power. So if the reason that I put forward something as evidence isn't because it's evidence, it's because it's evidence that I get to have that position of power. And so if you're a postmodernist and you say, well, I'm going to question your evidence, what you think you're saying is you're going to question my claim to that arbitrary power. The whole idea that there's evidence outside of claims of arbitrary power, the postmodernists dispensed with that in the 1970s. That's Derrida. That's exactly what he said.
And all this time I've been trying to get samples of thousands so that I could say, this is a little bit, we can say something, we can generalize.
No, that just demonstrates how thoroughly entrenched you are in the reigning patriarchal ideology.
I guess, and I was just hoping to get beyond anecdotal.
There's no beyond anecdotal. That's become a methodology.
Well,
that's auto
experience.
It's called autoethnography. There's a technical term.
Advocates of identity politics are excited to attack the idea of objectivity, facts, and evidence when doing so is to their advantage. But suppose one of them ends up in court. Will they still argue that there's no such thing as evidence? Essentially, advocates of identity politics are arguing for a return to a time long ago in history when people were declared guilty without a trial. The Magna Carta, developed by white Europeans in 1215, brought legal rights to all people and provided the foundation for the U.S. Constitution.
I think I'm a good fact finder.
They keep me in this job because I'm smart.
And if you should have brought that piece of evidence, you didn't, that is not my fault.
Here are some of the logical fallacies often involved in identity politics. Let's take some time and look at the way that the disintegration of serious scholarship in universities and the replacement of valid research with personal anecdote has led to the sloppy and racist concept of white privilege, which is such a core concept to identity politics.
Like we could say, well, racial discrimination plays some role in unfair inequality in the West. It's like, okay, probably, right? For all sorts of reasons. Well, how much? Exactly. Like really, exactly. Is it more important than intelligence or less important? What about attractiveness? Do we know? Do we know how? No, it's okay. If you're a postmodernist, especially if you're working in an appalling field like women's studies, you can just use your own personal experience and that's good enough. This is an incredibly influential piece of work she produced. Okay, well, what's her methodology for laying out what constitutes white privilege? The papers rely on personal examples. You know, in a social science, a reasonably well-developed social science, such as psychology, that gives you a failing grade in the first research project you do. And then let's think about this. It's like, why exactly is this white privilege? I don't quite get that. Why isn't it majority privilege? So to attribute that to something like systemic racism, which is another term I just absolutely despise, and which is making headway in Canada like you wouldn't believe. So you know what, we have a very peaceful country. We've had very little racial tension, but we're working hard to solve that problem, I can tell you. And to talk about white privilege is precisely that. It's racist, period. You can't just do that. You can't pull someone out and say, well, you're the member of this homogenous category system, and I can ignore all your heterogeneity, the diversity that the left, radical left, is always talking about. I can ignore all that diversity, and I can attribute to you this set of properties.
In the way that universities have turned from valid scientific studies towards anecdotal personal experience, we can see narcissism.
But that slogan, the personal is political, and particularly the way that it's played out within academia, for example, basically said that any objective fact about the world is worthless compared to people's subjective experiences, and it's how people experience things in a very subjective way that counts. And obviously then you completely lose the ability to evaluate any concept, any knowledge, any political position, because it's all based on your feelings.
As can be easily imagined, once we get rid of the requirement to have any factual basis for making a claim, the possibilities for absurd claims become endless.
I won't believe it. It can't be true.
To believe or not to believe, that is the question.
You better start believing it, 'cause I'm uncomfortable.
One woman even claimed that Newton's Principia, she said it was a rate manual. Another said that E equals MC squared is a sexist equation because it favors the speed of light over other speeds.
I just read a paper that said that mathematics is whiteness.
Yeah, definitely.
I didn't know that mathematics could have a race.
Mm-hmm. And it has now become transphobic to teach middle school students that women have ovaries and men have testes.
Sometimes people just want it's just political correctness run amok. It's just groupthink. It's just too many people who agree with each other wanting to enforce their point of view. That's not all that's happening. that they had what they called a free speech zone on campus. It was 0.1% of campus. It was actually, it's that little end of the point on the push pin. Not only did they limit free speech and protests and handing out newspapers on campus to that tiny little area, you had to get 10 days advance permission to even use that little tiny area. So we're being nice. We're telling the university for years that this is unconstitutional, and we're getting contemptuous letters back saying, nuh-uh, no, it's not. Defeated as soon as it got in front of a court, and we've been telling them that for years. So this, again, not a close call. It's about the defeat of the Klan when they marched on Notre Dame in 1924. And this book celebrates the fact that Notre Dame students got together and defeated them in a street fight. Because an employee at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, saw this book, the employee was offended. They did not bother talking to the student who was reading the book. He was found guilty of racial harassment without a hearing. And the fact that it took the combined effort of fire, the ACLU, and the Wall Street Journal to get this university to back down, what scares me is that students did not come to this student's defense. A previous generation of students hearing that someone was found guilty of reading a book in public would have literally rioted.
It's very disturbing, Tucker. There's not a single meritocratic institution that is free from the poison of identity politics.
So what we're seeing on college campuses is the rise of an ascendant orthodoxy, the scripture of the fundamentalist religion, and those who disagree are branded racist, heretics.
This is just a selection of the cases universities have lost over the years defending campus speech codes. University of Connecticut passes a speech code that includes a ban on derogatory names, inconsiderate jokes, and inappropriately directed laughter.
Now listen, I think there needs to be a rule against the wrong kind of laughter. You know, like when people snort when they're laughing.
De facto code of faculty conduct in which one's right to speak is now dictated by adherence to an ascendant orthodoxy in which one's race, gender, and sexual orientation are paramount. The problem, though, is when you speak out on a college campus from a perspective on the left that does not fit this orthodoxy, you are immediately categorized as on the right.
He describes himself as deeply progressive, but has been denounced as a racist tool of the alt-right by some students and faculty.
Well, they think that I'm a racist. Because if you stand up against one of these things because you think it's ill-considered, that you will be branded as a racist.
This school seems to focus so much on race that is actually becoming more racist. Because I choose not to focus on race, I've actually been labeled a racist and a white supremacist. I've been told several times that I'm not allowed to speak because I'm white. I feel like people are becoming more violent. The campus is becoming more of an unsafe place.
These affinity groups, and debate about that is so shut down. I wrote a column not long ago asking the question, put so much effort into bringing in a diverse class. What do they do to actually promote interaction so that you have diverse interactions? I was forwarded tweets where people were saying things like, I never knew Frank Bruni was such a racist.
D is for diversity. In lefties, diversity is the property of being the same as everyone else. When leftists achieve diversity, it means everyone now agrees that diversity is good, so they are diverse because they are the same.
Many students told us that they've been hesitant to publicly dissent. Kirsten, who also didn't want us to use her last name, is one of Weinstein's students.
I'm afraid of having a nuanced opinion because I'm afraid that my opinions and I will be stigmatized.
It's a rather strange sentence to hear on a university campus. I'm fearful of my nuanced opinion.
So I feel that I do not have the ability to speak if I have disagreements with the methods that are being used in the protests.
Is this that you have to either conform to what exactly they're saying, or you have to be on the other side and you can't find any middle ground whatsoever? Complete thing where you're either conforming absolutely to everything they're saying or nothing at all. And they can't start, policing language.
I don't care what happens to Brett anymore. He can go and be racist and be a piece of shit wherever he wants to do that. Hopefully, long term, we can just weed out people like Brett.
I think their concerns are legitimate. They're articulating ideas that have to do with race, ethnicity, power, privilege, and we're taking a look at them.
That's my problem, George. You keep doing these little hands
Come through.
People were criticizing you for using hand gestures.
Absolutely, they were. And you know,
That seems crazy to people from the outside of Evergreen.
It may, but it's noise.
But the noise has been effective.
No, fuck you, George. We don't want to hear a goddamn thing you have to say.
So you don't need to watch that door, watch all the doors, watch the windows. You need to keep eyes on them. And somebody needs to go in that room real quick to make sure that there's no way in that room for them.
I mean, essentially sounded like you're being held hostage there. If you were going to go to the bathroom, you had to go with 2 escorts? Is that true?
That's what the students felt was true.
If anyone disagrees that diversity is good, he is different and therefore not diverse, and that's bad. He must be forced to agree that diversity is good. Then he will be the same, which is diverse, and that's good.
Who are members of this anti-racism religion is simply that it was said and they're hearkening to the proclamation. So the idea that you're supposed to engage or ask questions, or some people might even want to be skeptical, that's considered incorrect. It's considered heretical. Now, he's preaching, and there is a community of people who are taking in the preaching. And why I call it preaching is because there's a sense in this religion that if you ask questions beyond a certain small point, then there's something wrong with you that you're not to ask. Now, of course, there are people who do ask. But when you ask the question, you're treated as if you've done something wrong. You've blown on a tuba in church. You're racist. You don't get it. You're not understanding the scripture. You're not with Jesus. That's what it is.
Hell enough for you and hell enough for anyone. And without the Lord Jesus Christ, you'll go to hell.
Again, they're on the left, and they're even LGBT affirming, but they will thank me for speaking out because we wish we could, but we can't. We'll lose our jobs. We'll get death threats.
By order of their gracious majesties, Queen Mary and King Philip, we are come to witness the burning of these Protestant heretics who have denied the authority of the one true Catholic Church and of His Holiness the Pope. Let them burn for all eternity.
Consider the context in which the hysteria about racism and other alleged oppressions is taking place. We live in one of the freest countries on earth, where people who would be stoned to death in other nations can live openly.
Assaults on free speech on college campuses, the attempts to silence nonconforming speech through administrative fiat, brute force, and sometimes actual violence is a clear betrayal of what the university should stand for and model for the rest of society, which is rational discourse. But that is not the fundamental problem on campuses today. That is an epiphenomenon of what I think is the more important problem, which is the incessant cultivation of a victim mentality. There has never been a more liberal, compassionate, and open-minded environment in human history. It's filled with pacific, well-meaning adults who are the least bigoted people in human history and who only wish the best for all of their students.
Iron fist.
Evergreen and most institutions are built on a racist model, so we are here demonstrating taking student control over an institution that we're paying to be at to make sure that our needs are being met.
The students are the most privileged individuals in human history.
Striking, though, is that this isn't happening in trade schools, and it's not happening in lower tier schools. It's happening in schools that are the most expensive and the hardest to get into, where
the dominant narrative on college campuses is that to be a female or to be an underrepresented minority is to be the target of incessant and virtually lethal oppression, because they said they were fighting to survive. They were fighting for their life at Brown.
When cis people try to tell us how to handle our oppression, it feels like someone telling you to scream a little more softly when you're being stabbed.
Now, I posit that that's a delusion. One of the banners shows two underrepresented minority students who say, "Allow others than yourself to exist." Again, I would say that's a delusion.
Have to. While trans people are fighting for their bodies and lives, cis people are fighting for their opinions.
But this view that universities are places of lethal threat is what leads ineluctably to the sense of entitlement to silence non-conforming speech, whether through administrative fiat or through violence.
If we don't have your help, if you don't speak up on these issues, we might as well kill ourselves now, because I don't see how we're ever going to be saved.
I think if nothing else, this story illustrates how you can't negotiate with these people. You can't try to please them because they'll never be pleased. If you've noticed, it's always the most liberal schools with the most liberal policies that have these problems, because when you're dealing with extremists, it's never enough for them. They're always going to want more social justice, more reparations, more diversity training, more speech codes. It's never going to stop.
I would hope that for once, a college president, when faced with the demands saying, for any brown student, I don't care if you are purple or green, to not realize that you are privileged to be there and that everybody is supporting your success, and to say that you're fighting to stay alive. For a president to kowtow before that and not say, get a grip.
Yeah, fuck free speech.
When we're dead, when people die, and you're sitting here like, well, at least they got to practice their free speech. I'm so sorry about it. Your free speech is not more important than the lives of like Black, trans, femmes, and students on this campus. I'm so sorry.
Problem is the college's president, George Bridges, seriously then proceeded to give in to pretty much all of the ridiculous demands that the students had made.
This delusional narrative that students think they have to fight for their lives in some of the safest places in the world is connected to the way that Black leaders are teaching Blacks to fetishize their victimization.
Black problem. We have been taught as Black people to pretend that racism is more of a problem than it is. So, to be a good, smart Black person is to walk around identifying racism in various ways. Of course, it's not usually overt, and so you're supposed to find it in subtle ways. And, look for it and you'll find it. And that means that you are taught that to be a good, educated Black person is to claim that we are the only people in the history of humanity who can only succeed under ideal conditions. We are taught that to say that makes us proud. But why have you been taught to fetishize it so much?
Racism is around every corner. There is systemic racism. There's structural racism. There are microaggressions, and there's white privilege, and all of this. This is designed again is the shock of freedom, and not knowing. I mean, you look at today's Black leadership, they have no clue of how to move ahead.
What do you want to do today?
I don't know. What do you want to do today?
I don't know. What do you want to do today?
I don't know. What do you want to do today?
I don't know. What do you want to do today?
All they can think to do is ask for more from the government. Well, we've asked for the government has given us almost everything. Nowhere in history has the government paid off its people more than America has in the last 60 years.
Benita Brown!
Hey, Scott!
How are you tonight?
I am so happy. I'm thrilled.
Do you have your family here also?
I sure do. The
Bring
Brown
them
family.
on
Come on in, y'all.
Come on in.
Woo! What you got for me, Scott?
Here we go. Here's tonight's winner of $57 million.
And yet we are, by most socioeconomic measures, farther behind white America than we were in the 50s.
I'm gonna keep my job. We ain't never working again. Two words. I quit. White people's the only people that keep their jobs. I quit before they said the last number.
Just hard because there's just all these conversations we have to have because racism is just, it's bad right now. We have to have all these people of color. We have to have all these conversations, and unfortunately, we have to have them with white people. And that thing where you go, hey, I had a thing happen, it was racism. They go, how'd you know it was racism? How'd you know it was racism? Because I'm kind of an expert in this. I've been studying it my whole life, whether I wanted to or not.
You cannot keep interrupting. No.
So here's a bullshit. We're supposed to believe that this well-off, middle-class black man with a successful career in one of the most liberal, tolerant areas of a free nation has been endlessly plagued by racism all his life? Well,
I am a middle-class black person, and yet I am going to say, on behalf of myself, in terms of some slightly racist comment I may have heard somebody make, and on behalf of my cousins who are working class or poor, that they will not be able to succeed until white people are completely devoid of any vestige of racism. That in itself makes no logical sense.
And let me just explain white people. This is what it sounds like when you say that to us, because I don't think you get how crazy that sounds. It would be like if I was to run into you on the street, collective white person. And I was like, hey, what do you do today? I was like, well, I got up, I ran some errands, and I had lunch. What'd you have for lunch? I had pizza. How'd you know it was pizza? You'd be like, what are you talking about?
So the view of the world he's presenting here is that asking logical questions is really kind of silly because things are obvious. Like, you obviously know someone's motivation, so you know that racism is like pizza. Also, for Kamau, a really tiny pizza is racism. He went to the Elmwood Cafe in the Bay Area. A waitress mistook him for a panhandler because of the way he was standing. She knocked on the glass at him. Instead of talking to her about it and coming to understand that was just an innocent mistake, he pulled out his black card, and she ended up fired from her job.
Out the black card, right? No, not the one from Visa or American Express. This one is much more valuable. Only one way you can get your hands on it. You have to be born with black skin. That's the only requirement. Really. You can be poor, middle class, rich, it doesn't matter. The black card will still confer upon you an entire history of oppression, even if you've never been oppressed. The people you might think have the most legitimate claim to the black card refuse to use it.
Do you think that race card playing kids at these liberal venues, newsrooms, where they can define the debate simply by demonstrating their anger at how dare you white people write a story like that? Lecture halls, where they can set the temper of what is going to be said and what can't be said based upon claims of privilege. You don't know how my ancestors have suffered. You don't know what it's like to be black. Do you think that's not power? Do you think the ability to shut down a conversation, to shut people up, is not power? Do you think the people who exercise that prerogative don't know that they have power?
But since so many people love to use it, the sensitivity trainings multiply.
Same question, Lisa. A black man walks in to order a coffee. What do you say?
I say, hi, welcome to Starbucks. What can I get for you?
Whoa, what's with the tone, Lisa?
What tone?
Okay, listen, I don't know how many times I have to say this, but we have to treat everyone equally. Try it again with a better tone, Lisa.
Okay. Hi, welcome to Starbucks. What can I get for you?
Okay, you might as well just call a protest yourself, Lisa. What can I get for you? I'm sorry, is he that much of an inconvenience? Like, this is the kind of stuff that's gonna get us in trouble. I bet if he was a white man, you would have just said, how can I help you?
No, I think...
No, that's the problem! Lisa, you don't think. You need to care.
The huckster con game is so attractive to so many that those few courageous people who speak out against it get shouted down, called names. People say they are not really black.
The cruelty and derision reserved for students of color who spoke in my defense was particularly troubling.
Actually, there are a lot of people in the black community who actually think the way that I do, but it's very risky to actually say it, because then you'll be called a name, you'll be scorned, and that is what the established Progressive Party wants.
Nevertheless, to a great many black people, I'm bad for saying that because I'm distracting white people from their guilt. Over the 20 years that I have been commenting about race, I have noticed that
You run up against these two things, and you're told that you are an asshole. And you are told that you're not really an intellectual. You're told that you just don't understand. And I've gotten tired.
Remember the mayor of Baltimore, the female black mayor of Baltimore,
Yes.
mentioned thugs and was basically run out of town? That's what happens to somebody who does something like that, though.
And they kept saying he's the token black guy on Fox. Right. Now, I'm sure you get plenty
Oh
of
my
this kind of
goodness.
thing.
Token, bootlicker, Uncle Tom, Sambo Tom, coconut as in brown on the outside, white on the inside, Oreo, same concept, the Antichrist.
Man, you got a whole list.
Because they've got to malign somebody like me. I am a bigger threat to their whole ideology than almost anybody else. A black guy who does not believe that he's a victim, a black guy who believes in hard work and personal responsibility, a black guy who doesn't believe in handouts, a black guy who doesn't believe in the welfare state, a black guy who doesn't believe in affirmative action. I am the antithesis of everything they stand for, and therefore I can't just be dealt with facts and rebutted with facts. I've got to be maligned. I've got to be cast away. I've got to be treated as if I'm Darth Vader. That's what the left does.
In a way, that is actually showing.
It's racist. Of course it is. It's bigotry.
Right, because
I don't have the same right to have an opinion as somebody else. I've never heard Rush Limbaugh be called anti-white because he criticizes Hillary and the left. But I criticize black left people, and I'm anti-black. It's bigotry. It's racism. Calling somebody an Uncle Tom is as offensive as calling somebody an N-word lover.
Yeah.
What's happened is we launched this so-called war on poverty in the 60s, where literally Lyndon Johnson sent people knocking on doors. I lived in the 60s, and people knocked on doors apprising women of their availability to welfare, provided there was no man in the house. And we went from 25% of blacks being born outside of wedlock in 65 to 75% right now. And you look at how much money that we spent on welfare, and the lines are parallel. It was a neutron bomb dropped on this country, not just on the black community, but on people in general.
What is the goal there?
The goal is to tell black people that we're victims, that discrimination and racism remain major problems in America when in fact they don't.
So I have this image of Kamau and others engaged in this lifelong quest, traveling to the ends of the earth, the depths of the earth, seeking out ever more trivial incidents of racism, all the while straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel, ignoring the problems in their own community.
The Democratic Party gets 95% of the black vote, and the reason they get it is because blacks are convinced that the number one issue facing the country right now is social justice, racist white cops, discrimination, systemic racism, microaggression, whatever new word they come up with, and it's a bunch of nonsense. The number one problem domestically facing this country is a breakdown of the family. A black kid, or a kid, not just a black kid, a kid raised without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. So you're far more likely to end up in jail without having a dad than you are because of a white racist cop.
Right. So,
in fact, it is not only untrue that the country is permeated by systemic anti-black racism and white-on-black violence, but the truth is the exact opposite. And it appears that many on the left are conspiring to hide the truth. The number of black males committing crimes, especially violent crime, is far out of proportion to their percentage of the population. Moreover, as regards interracial violence, the amount of black on white violence is 25 times higher than the amount of white on black violence. Colin Flaherty, who wrote the book Don't Make the Black Kids Angry, has been one of the lone voices in bringing this disturbing truth to light. For anyone who's paying attention, you can easily see that the problems are beginning in public schools with young kids. The schools are in disarray, the students are out of control, and teachers are afraid.
We'll roll the clip.
I had a student take a calculator and beat another student upside the head, broke the calculator, was not suspended. Another student got the scissors and started making a stabbing motion. I'm called by my students gay, lesbian, dyke, sir, and my favorite, white girl.
She cited the ongoing verbal assaults as primary reasons for her pending resignation.
Students tell me, who the F-bomb do you think you're speaking to? And shut the F up talking to me. But they go unpunished.
If we're to walk into that high school, what would we see?
You'd shake your head. You couldn't believe it was a school. You cannot believe that this could absolutely be going on.
Because we'd see what?
You'd see chaos. You'd see kids literally screaming and yelling, rolling in the hallway, swearing, cursing, wrestling, sometimes fighting, and you'll see no administration.
I came to work at Washington Middle School 9 years ago because I wanted to work with at-risk kids and kids in need. That is my calling in life. It's what I was made to do, and I'm good at it. Washington has been in a downward spiral for a long time, but has been deteriorating rapidly over the past 5 years. I fear for my safety every day. Students and staff are physically, verbally, emotionally, mentally, and sexually abused every single day in the building. None of us are safe right now. We are sworn at and called vile, crude, and sexual names every day. I have a list here of horrifying things that were said to your employees and your students in just the last 2 days. It fills a page. I struggled with whether or not to read this list to you. However, I couldn't bring myself to say them out loud because they are so disgusting. A student was held down on a table and his legs put into vice grips so that other students could take his shoes. Another student approached a group of teachers and pulled his pants down and touched himself inappropriately while laughing at their request to stop.
I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to look out at my students knowing that I'm failing 3/4 of them because of the discipline of a quarter. It's absolutely ridiculous. What we are practicing in this district is setting our students up for a life of failure. We are not serving them. We are not serving our community. We are not benefiting anybody. If we cannot figure out how to get our kids to stop swearing at their faculty, stealing from their faculty, shoving each other, it doesn't matter what I do up at the front of that classroom. It is our students. They know they're not accountable.
Well, black students are allowed to riot in the schools because their white teachers are afraid to say anything about their behavior. The white school kids are now subject to the pronoun police. We're here because we heard your daughter use the wrong pronoun for a trans kid in school today. Is that true?
Yeah. A first grader was sent to the principal's office recently after she misgendered a classmate. The girl met a boy she'd known from kindergarten on the playground, but when she said hello, she was chastised for not using the boy's new female name and feminine pronouns.
This poor little first grader, she genuinely was going up to see her friend she hadn't seen, since last year in kindergarten, and said hello to him and got in trouble for it. And she was quite upset. The parents have since left the school district because they were told she would have to go to the principal's office again and be investigated if it happened again.
Restraining at a gnat and swallowing a camel, punishing white kids for using the wrong pronouns, allowing black kids to engage in disruption and violence without consequences.
You've brought up the issue of violence in the African American community. The figures are dismal, aren't they? Professor Orlando Patterson from Harvard University gives some pretty stark figures that I'm sure you'll agree with. African Americans, 13% of the US population, but they commit 50% of homicides. 80% of homicides are black on black. Black men killing other black men. African Americans are imprisoned at 8 times the rate of whites, and 1 in 3 blacks has a prison record. What's going wrong in the African American community? Violence. Take the flash mobs, which we've seen in Philadelphia, groups of young African Americans going in packs, terrorizing neighborhoods, popular tourist neighborhoods and so on. Now, you have said when that has happened, you said to these youngsters, you have damaged your own race.
You are responsible for how you present yourself out in the community, and that you can hurt the image of your own race by engaging in certain behaviors.
Is it good tough message you use? You say things to African American males, pull up your trousers, because they like to wear their trousers low without the belt, and nobody wants to see your underwear, you say. You talk about how...
Generally not.
You talk about how their hair is unkempt and they should comb their hair. They should not just limit themselves to the kind of black slang that they use. They should extend their vocabulary. You talk about the fact that whites get out of elevators when blacks go in, or people cross the other side of the street when they see young black males and so on. Are you not buying into racial racial stereotypes yourself when you use that kind of strong language?
No, I'm speaking the truth. Sometimes you just have to tell the truth. And
when I look at the sorry state of the black community, the destruction of the family, the loss of integrity, and I look at what we are as black people, I'd rather be dead than to continue to live and call myself a black man against such statistics. But while I have life, while I have breath, while I have strength, I'm going to keep on preaching to you black people until you get the strength of God, the power and the wisdom of God back in you. You better kill me. That's what you better do, because if you don't kill me, I'm going to deliver you.
But that kind of response is very rare. Instead, more often what we see is this kind of response to such statistics and such deep problems in the black community.
What about our protection right now? Fuck you and fuck the police! Let me remind y'all, that's how whiteness works. Whiteness is the most violent fucking system to ever breathe.
I'm tired of white people talking about what black and brown people need. You don't know. I'm right here, baby.
You're a whiner. You just whine. Stop whining. Stop.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and realize I may not be speaking for all white people, but I think I can safely say that most of us do not want you to scream at us and call us racist. We don't need you telling us that we cannot come to school because our very presence makes you feel unsafe.
Welcome to Judge of Characters, where black pop culture shrivels up and dies in white hands.
Older.
I mean, we gave y'all getting jiggy with it, and whoop, there it is. Isn't that enough?
You also gave us higher crime rates and an epidemic of single mothers. Now that was enough.
White supremacy that lives and breathes within every single white person standing here right now.
Live from Texas State University here in San Marcos, Texas, and I have in my hand the University Star. And this story, your DNA is an abomination, and the whole story is basically about hating white people and how white people are bad. So what did...
And if you look at that white man, he's a lying thing and a murderous human being. There is...
All white people are racist. So I put this up because I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, oh, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually.
Alrighty then.
So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human.
Why white people are the devil.
Like that actually, instead of people of color and black folks being dehumanized, that actually everyone is dehumanized off rip within white supremacy, that y'all are born into a life to not be human, and that's what y'all are taught to do, to be demons. So in this particular way, white people are all racist. So I just want y'all to know that up front.
This nice young lady who says this little gem.
This invasion of the motherfucking body snatchers, which is what white people are. They're fucking aliens. They're fucking parasites. They're fucking soulless monsters.
Have you ever wanted to just shrivel up and die? Well, I hope not, because you and your life matters, and you are a special, unique individual. Unless, of course, you're a white person. Seriously, if you're a white, why don't you just crawl back into the mayo jar you came out of?
Well, I think I misplaced my mayo jar, but here's somebody else with a different opinion.
Black people are the most racist people you've ever seen in all your days. If you know a black person, he or she is a hardcore racist. Black people are the most racist people on the entire earth.
Or you can go to the Church of White Guilt, and this is what you'll hear instead.
The ideology of whiteness as status utterly envelops us, Europeans, in its poisonous embrace. We cannot escape its cocoon. Rather, we carry whiteness with us like a charm that protects us from harm, shields us from impact as we dive from the known to the unknown, parachute from one spot on the globe to another as immigrants, tourists, or do-gooders abroad. The poison of white supremacy we ingest with our mother's milk lingers.
Word of the day is privilege!
What's that all about?
We'll show you! A 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. When you walk into a room and mostly everybody's white, privilege!
No, statistics.
Democratic student leaders at Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania have asked their peers and professors to wear white puzzle pins to bring attention to white privilege.
Check your privilege!
Why are you wearing a white privilege button?
Because I'm acknowledging that I have white privilege because my skin tone is white.
When the Germans came in March 19th in 1944, after a week we were told we have to wear a yellow star and everybody has to have it on their clothing.
One of the demands, the president had to acknowledge his white male privilege.
I don't see a problem with that demand.
I'm also tall, athletic, smart, and rich. Should I apologize for that too? Next.
The process of discovering my whiteness and how deep it goes and how unconscious it is has been long and meandering. The privilege to walk through life whistling and not having to think about it.
Gay! I feel like you're being a little bit insensitive to Lisa.
Well, you know what? We can't afford to be sensitive in a sensitivity training. It's 2018, people. Y'all need to get woke. Dale, help me out here. What do you say?
Before I take your order, I would like to apologize on behalf of my white ancestors.
So in spite of the fact that we have white people making complete fools of themselves in these workshops where they're indoctrinated with self-hatred.
What do you guys want?
We want justice. We want all this discrimination that they doing to our people to end. All this racism, all these threats. What the white people need to understand is that they keep on threatening us. We gonna have to get on what they want. You know what I mean? Eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. If somebody threaten you or somebody try to put your life in danger, you have to let them feel the same way.
As Heather McDonald stated previously, I posit that this is a delusion. And specifically, it is the delusion of psychological projection, whereby people are projecting the contents that are inside their own psyche onto other people because they have not owned their own stuff.
Projection occurs when we attribute an element of our personality, which resides in our unconscious, to another person or group. We can project both negative and positive characteristics, however, there is a greater tendency to project the former rather than the latter. Projection is one of the commonest psychic phenomena. Everything that is unconscious in ourselves we discover in our neighbor, and we treat him accordingly. Courage to face up to one's weaknesses and dark qualities. But while difficult, this task is crucial in the battle of life, for failure to confront one's shadow leaves these elements free to grow in scope and influence, as Jung explains.
Someone said that the world we perceive is nothing but an outpicturing of our beliefs. In other words, whatever we see inwardly determines what we see on the outside. If I perceive, for instance, a lot of hate in me, I see a lot of hate in the outside world. And if I see a lot of love in me, I see a lot of love also around me. Whatever is in me determines what I see in the world around me.
What this means is that if you're unconscious of your own racism, you're going to look outside and see racism in everyone. If you're unconscious of your own self-hatred, you're going to look out at everybody and see your own hatred being directed back at you. Whatever you're denying and don't want to face up to, you're going to look at someone else's eye and see it coming back.
Black people have ever done. They did it here in America under white people's help. When they were in Africa, they didn't do nothing. And you know, black people always walk around with a chip on their shoulder because they're black, daring anybody to say anything to them. And our society has been hijacked and kidnapped and pushed into a corner where no one can say anything publicly about black people. If you do, they call you a racist and a bigot.
African Americans haven't made an iota of progress. Of course this has to be because we're still oppressed. How do you deal with that argument, Shelby?
It's a corruption. Who says that's because of racism? Maybe it's because you haven't yet developed the value system to the ideas with which to thrive in freedom. Maybe you don't know what to do with the opportunities that surround you. It's understandable. You were oppressed. And people have not pointed out to you the challenge of freedom. And what do people do with freedom when they don't know how to handle it? They reinvent their oppression, even as it has faded away. They make it up in their mind all over again.
Even if you, the viewer, think that this is not quite true and that there is racism in the country that has to be addressed and there's more that needs to be done, keep in mind, as Shelby Steele goes on to point out, that the structure is set up not to help black people, not to even see what they really need. The system is set up to absolve white people from guilt. So all the giving that's being done, all the programs, all the handouts, it's not intended to be effective. It's intended to be church for white people so they don't have to feel guilty.
Everybody knows in America that's the bottom line. If you are seen as a racist openly in public, you are ruined. You have no life. Whites live, and we have not acknowledged this enough. 90%, what Johnson was doing is saying, I can't have you call me and I can't have you call this country a racist. And so I'm going to give you a whole bunch of things. And I worked in those programs, so I know them intimately. They were just sort of what we would say, jump off the toilet programs. Anything, well, just something we can throw money at to say we're not racist. We don't care whether it works. We're not going to follow up we had school busing for how many decades, ruining the public school system. No one even asked a question about it. What was the point of that? All these bad ideas, school integration did absolutely nothing.
Shelby, you said a moment ago the federal government's given us everything. Here, let me read you. You know this well. President Johnson's 1965 commencement address at Howard University. Quote, "You do not take a person who has been hobbled by chains and bring him up to the starting line of a race and say, you're free to compete with the others. Equal opportunity is essential, but not enough," close quote. So this notion that there has to be compensation for all those years of oppression is fundamental to all policy concerning African Americans for the last half century and more.
That statement was about what I've written a good deal about, white guilt. And it was a horrible historical, as far as I'm concerned, mistake, because what Johnson was saying was, we oppressed you, now we're going to lift you up and redeem you.
You're still our responsibility.
But, your fate remains in our hands.
Right.
Your fate, you don't see your fate as being in your hands. It's now in our hands, the government's hands, every kind of philanthropic group's hands, everybody's hands but yours.
Well, I can tell you, If I could multiply my mother and put her in all of those homes with little kids growing up, you would see a very different outcome.
How?
You know, the person who really has...
What was it about her messaging to you?
Well, she refused to be a victim, and she refused to let us be victims. In putting together mechanisms that allow people to climb out of dependency and to become strong parts of the fabric of America, that's what we're working on. It doesn't do any good to pat people on the head and give them all the little things that they need so that they're satisfied in a state of dependency. That's exactly what we don't need. That's killing us.
Roger Goodell, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, quote, "They're talking about equality issues, making sure that we're doing everything we possibly can, we in the NFL, are doing or we in the United States, actually, I'm not sure what he meant. We're doing everything we possibly can to give people an opportunity, whether it's education or economic." What do you make of that statement?
What in the world has that got to do with football? That is just a perfect white guilt statement. He's saying, he may as well just say, I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent. I'm not a racist, I'm not a racist. And he will find a way, I understand he has, give millions of dollars to some cause called social justice. Well, what is that? I can tell you what that is. That's a lot of hustling. That's a lot of black hustlers stepping forward to take that $100 million and put it in their pocket and make things. Again, you create a whole class of hustlers. You make black leaders. Black leadership today is pretty much nothing left but hustlers who work white guilt.
All right.
Ironically, for all the talk of diversity on college campuses, colleges lack ideological diversity. This results in a provincial environment where students are not exposed to alternate points of view, thus leading to a greater likelihood of vilifying persons with such views, as well as failing to prepare them for real life.
And then lastly, and Jonathan I think can speak to this much better than I can, there's not a lot of ideological diversity on a lot of the campuses where this is happening. And so the notion that somebody with a perspective totally contrary to your own deserves the stage, deserves to be heard, that's sort of going away because there's so little diversity and there's so little appreciation for that, really important ethos of education and of civil debate.
Great, but they've adopted a way that is kind of vindictive, that is all about calling people out. So people are afraid of them. And it's not just the students, it's actually the professors too. So even if it's only 5 or 10% on any campus, the fact that they can file charges against a professor. Wow. At NYU, we have a new bias response team. So any video I show, anything I say in class, if it offends a student, there's numbers all over in every bathroom urging them to call, report me.
There is a large, I suspect, silent majority. What scares me is that they are cowed. Yes. And when I talk to students, and I think it's especially a problem in the humanities and the social sciences in elite universities, they tailor what they write in their term papers and what they say in class to what is in reality a lot of penalties the professors are prepared to impose on them if they say the wrong thing.
When students are not exposed to diversity of viewpoints and are encouraged to focus on their victimization, this leads to narcissism and solipsism.
Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?
I actually think the name identity politics is wrong. I think this has nothing to do with politics. I think it's more about narcissism. It's about a complete obsession with the self, and we can't relate to the world other than how we see ourselves in it. Okay.
Transgender movement illustrates this narcissism, and here we see most clearly how identity politics is leading to mass delusion and the totalitarian enforcement of fantasy ideology that denies physical and biological reality.
We counted 58 gender options on Facebook.
Okay.
Holy crow! That's way too many.
The dating app Tinder announced a new feature this week which gives users 37 different gender identity options. It's called Why Democrats Lost the Election.
I think it's really great for people to explore the vast treasure house of archetypes lying inside ourselves. However, the transgender ideology is seriously confusing what is inside ourselves with our outer physical form. Our inner experiences need not match our outer form. On our journey down the path of life, we will encounter and spend a lot of time playing with many inner archetypes. And we can do this regardless of the physical form that we happen to inhabit. The transgender phenomenon is giving rise to an increasing number of claimed gender identities, as well as supporting people claim to be a different race, age, or species. The failure to view these as inner archetypal experiences is, I think, symptomatic of our loss of contact with the spiritual world and the excessive materialism and literalism of our culture.
And apparently people have decided that because I don't think that post-operative transgender men, i.e. M2F, transgender people are women, I'm not to be allowed to talk.
But surely if a man who feels that he actually would like gender reassignment, then that's what should be done. They should be allowed to do that.
I'm not saying that people should not be allowed to go through that procedure. What I'm saying is it doesn't make them a woman. It happens to be an opinion. It's not a prohibition. Carry on. If that's what you think it is you want to do. I've been accused of inciting violence against transsexual people. That's absolute nonsense.
But do you feel that the transgender community has too big a voice now? It seems to me you're saying that they're becoming what feminists were often called strident.
Yes, but they very seldom were strident, alas. I think that a great many women don't think transsexual M2F transsexual people look like, sound like, or behave like women. But they daren't say so.
But just because they daren't say so doesn't mean that that person can't feel like that and feels more comfortable with themselves.
Yeah, but so what? That's not my issue. I don't even talk about it. Not everybody does feel comfortable, by the way, post-operatively. There's been a couple of cases I found very interesting where the actual acceptor of the procedure has felt that it's been a disaster.
But for those who do not feel it's been a disaster and feel more comfortable, then do you understand how they might feel that you have been hurtful towards them?
People are hurtful to me all the time. Try being an old woman. I mean, for goodness sake. People get hurt all the time. I'm not about to walk on eggshells.
So someone like Caitlyn Jenner, for example, who has been who's been in the front of lots of magazines and apparently is, I think I'm right in saying, getting an award for being a Glamour Woman of the Year. What do you think about that?
I think it's misogynist. I think misogyny plays a really big part in all of this. That a man who goes to these lengths will be a better woman than someone who was just born a woman.
Would you ever consider saying something more ameliorating?
No. I'm getting fed up with this, you know. I've had things thrown at me. I've been accused of things I have never done or said. People seem to have no concern about evidence or indeed even about libel.
I agree with Germaine Greer. There's no such thing as transitioning to another gender. We cannot become the other gender. People are losing touch with reality and thinking that their fantasies are reality. Transgender ideology is very shallow. Jungian psychology shows us that in the depths of the psyche, all of us have male and female archetypes there to be explored. This is the paradox of human nature. It's already there. We don't have to change our outside in order to access the contents of our own psyche.
You've stated that the transgender ideology is responsible for large-scale child abuse. Could you please explain why you call it child abuse?
Essentially, transgender ideology holds that people can be born into the wrong body. It's simply not true. No one is born in the wrong body. So to take that lie and essentially indoctrinate all of our children from preschool forward with that lie, we are destroying their ability for reality testing. Okay, so this is cognitive and psychological abuse.
If you live in the city of New York and you say that Caitlyn Jenner is Bruce, or if you say that it's a man, a grandpa in a dress, and not a woman, you can now be fined $250,000. No joke, the city of New York just updated their anti-discrimination policies and penalties.
Most children will not understand that a boy grows into a man and stays a man, or that a girl grows into a woman and stays a woman. If they see a man get into a dress and put on makeup, many 7-year-olds may believe he just became a woman. I'll call him Joey, left the classroom, presumably to use the bathroom, and then came back into the classroom in a dress. And the teacher said, "Boys and girls, Joey is actually a girl just like Jazz. From now on, we need to call her Josephine." This was very confusing to the other children in kindergarten, and it terrified one girl in particular. She was home with her mother, had just bathed, got out of the tub, mom wraps her up, little girl goes by the mirror, her hair was slicked back. She burst into tears. "Mommy, am I turning into a boy? I don't want to turn into a boy. Joey turned into a girl. Am I going to turn into a boy?" And this mother is being told that she is the one who's crazy. Her daughter is the one who is having a problematic reaction. So yes, pubertal castration, okay, so gaslighting, pubertal castration, and surgical mutilation, that's child abuse. It's institutionalized child abuse.
Last year, let me give you an example, some female students in Auckland, you may have heard about this, as part of a women's festival organised a cupcake day, with the cupcakes shaped and decorated to resemble women's vulvas. The intent was to encourage women to feel comfortable with their bodies and to combat the idea that women's genitalia are all supposed to fit some prescribed shape and size. A number of male to female transgender people vociferously protested that the cupcake event created an unsafe environment for them and tried to have it shut down. The organisers pointed out that every other event during the festival catered to transgender people. The cupcake event was the only one that focused specifically on women's experience. Some male to female transgender protesters even said the event was killing them.
Why are women letting men into their events? Women need to stand up to this. Say no.
Go away. Whatever happened to stop or I'm gonna knock you in your nuts?
Actually giving into their demands is only going to encourage this type of behavior. When a child throws a tantrum because he's not getting his way, you don't just give in to him, you set boundaries.
The ideology of transgender male-sexed people is providing male-sexed people with new ways of exercising socially, culturally, and ideologically their sense of entitlement over women, their presumed right to dictate what a woman is, how women should think, and how we should behave. Want to be transgender? Fine, go ahead and be transgender. Just stop bullying women. There's this narrative of victimhood that is being put forward, that is then put forward as a justification for bullying women into accepting whatever male to female transgenders, some, not all, wish to impose on us. That is just wrong.
Andrea,
I know women who are too scared to come to this debate. I had an abusive phone call following the op-eds in the Herald. This is not a fabricated problem. This is real, and women are being bullied.
Speaking of women being bullied, there's a problem with male to female transgender people being permitted to use the women's restroom. They're arguing that to use the men's bathroom is unsafe, but by using the women's room, they are making women feel unsafe, as this film shows.
With help of my trans friend, today I'm going to dress and act like a transgender. I'm then going to enter women's bathrooms, and let's see how they react. How do I look?
Oh my God. Joe, you look...
What are you doing?
I'm transgender.
What? No, you can't be in here.
This is a girl's bathroom. I identify as a
You
girl.
are not. Do you hear yourself right now? You are not a woman. You have.
Hey.
Ow! Get out! Get out!
What? I'm transgender.
What are you doing in
I'm
here? Get
transgender.
out.
I'm a girl.
Get out. No. Get
I'm
out.
a girl.
No, get out.
Why?
I wasn't less of a woman the day before I had the surgery than I was the day after I had the surgery.
Which begs the question, why do the surgery? I watched him going, is it me? I was just as much of a woman who sounded like the Joker from the Batman comics.
Exactly. Now let's look at what happened when Ben Shapiro tried to challenge transgender ideology on a TV show.
And all the time I'm sitting there thinking, this is a mental hospital. This is crazy. Caitlyn Jenner is a man. Caitlyn Jenner is genetically a man, biologically a man, has the genitals of a man, has the brain structures of a man. Caitlyn Jenner is a man.
The hardest part about being a woman is figuring out what to wear.
And we're all sitting here pretending Caitlyn Jenner is not a man. Why? Well, because it's politically correct to do so. So humoring the delusional is now not just politically correct, you will be punished if you do not. Why are we mainstreaming delusion?
It's not delusion. Why would you call it delusion?
Because Caitlyn Jenner, I'll call him Caitlyn Jenner.
No,
because
it's
that's
her. You're not being polite to the pronoun.
Because
disrespectful.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure this womanhood thing out.
Get insulting.
So you don't know what you're talking about. You're not educated on genetics.
Would you like to discuss the genetics? Or no?
Well, no,
what
no.
are your genetics?
So I'd stay away from the genetics and back to the brain scans.
You cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Okay, so here's what's happened.
Exactly a year after going public as a male to female transgender and then becoming a poster child for the left's transgender movement, Jenner is reportedly miserable and may actually transition back to being a man, which of course he's never stopped being.
So if Caitlyn Jenner goes back to being the man, Bruce Jenner, that he was all along, then what about the argument that we were supposed to use the correct pronoun for Caitlyn Jenner? If it turns out that Caitlyn was never Caitlyn, but always was the man, Bruce Jenner.
The argument, if you can even call it that, I'll call it a claim. The claim by the activist physicians on the other side is that when a child persistently and consistently insists that he is really a girl, well then that's it. That's how you diagnose born transgender.
You'd act, well, yeah, this is sensible parroting.
My kid at 3 said, everyone thinks I'm a girl and I'm not. And then I said, however you feel is fine. And then Penelope said, no, I don't feel like a boy, Mama. I am a boy. That's as clear as it gets.
Well, that settles it. At 3? Really? I'm a boy. Really? Yes. Also, I want to put my hand in the stove. I suppose. I think this kind of more parents are turning their children transgender.
What worries me, however, is often a passing phase of thinking that you're of the opposite sex, and which passes quite normally, is being medicalized. And these children are having a label hung around their neck, and inappropriate medical intervention is taking place.
My name is Ariel. I am 13 years old and I identify as a girl. And you're just in this nice little world where you're still like a child and it's just great.
He asked us to call her a different Disney princess name every day.
Me turning into a man is just probably the most horrifying thing ever I could ever think of. In the farthest reaches of my mind is me not going on the hormone blockers anymore and me developing into a man. That would just be horrible.
Newsflash. One of the tasks of adult life is coming to terms with reality Suppose little Ariel or Snow White had said that the most horrifying thing would be to grow up into an adult. Is Mommy going to get her medical intervention so she doesn't ever have to grow higher than 4 feet tall? And so she can stay in 3rd grade all her life? Or what if your son said he was a cat? Would you take him to get medical procedures to add fur to his body and... The push to change reality in order to accommodate our fantasy is a flight from the existential challenges posed by life and is called Bad Faith by Soren Kierkegaard. Also, in my opinion, we are heavily overemphasizing the concept of privilege, and we should go back to the concept of thrownness.
It's the there's an arbitrariness to that the existentialists called thrownness, and you can't really attribute that to your own doing. It's something to be grateful for and to recognize.
Far left never seems to know when to stop. If we accept transgenderism, we gotta let it all in. Transracial, sure.
Identify as black.
Trans species. Look, man, if that's how you feel.
If I think I'm a dog, does that make me a dog?
Physically no, but I guess in your heart you are, right?
And now, trans age.
When I've gone back to being a child, I don't want to be an adult right now.
That's right. Walsh claims not only to be transgender, but trans age as well, and she now lives as a 6-year-old girl.
Well, I have a mommy and daddy, adopted mommy and daddy, who are totally comfortable with me being a little girl, and their children and their grandchildren are totally supportive.
They reach the final precipice. This is the last chance to turn back. Yet over they go, casting themselves bodily out into space.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Number one, the definition of a delusion is a fixed false belief. So if I persistently, consistently insist that I am Margaret Thatcher, or persistently, consistently insist that I am a cat, or a person, I'm an amputee trapped in a normal body, I am delusional. And in fact, there are people who believe they are amputees trapped in a normal body. They are appropriately diagnosed as having body identity integrity disorder. Mouth.
I don't have any regrets taking my vision. I believe I should have been born blind.
Because to hear someone say, I've always felt I should be blind, well, I've always felt I should be the Queen of England, but I'm not going out to become the Queen of England.
Well, and they analogize this to gender identity disorder. A woman in a man's body or a man in a woman's body, and they seek that for a long time was considered to be extremely bizarre, and now it is not looked at in that way. Counseling, a couple of years of living that way to see if in fact that is truly what they want, and only then are they considered a candidate for any type thing.
Here's where it's getting really crazy. Dr. Phil is actually trying to explain why people should be allowed to get a medical professional to blind them or to remove one of their healthy limbs. Where does this stop? What if someone really very strongly believes they should have no head or that they should not be alive? Do we grant them that wish too?
London-born Chloe is on a quest to find a surgeon willing to operate in order to paralyse her legs forever.
People have a lot of different fantasies or inner images of themselves, and not all of them are healthy. It seems that out of a reluctance to pass judgment on people's self-identity and exploration, we are now countenancing mass delusion. I see the transgender phenomenon as existing on a continuum with some of the extreme forms of plastic surgery.
This man right here has spent $50,000 on plastic surgery to transform himself
into a genderless alien.
You said you don't like being labelled as anything, and you didn't really identify with being male or female.
Right. Hi, beautifuls. Yes. So my next steps would be to possibly remove my genitals, my nipples, my belly button, just to kind of give me a complete blank, unsexual, sexless look.
Vinny O claims that he doesn't identify as either a male or female, and this ongoing process of transforming into an alien being is meant to mirror how he feels inside.
Alrighty then.
In the past, a man puts on a dress, he's wearing drag. Well, now the drag is no longer made out of cotton and silk. No, now the drag is hormones and surgery. It's still drag.
If I told you that I was a woman, what would your response be?
Good for you. Okay, like, yeah.
If I told you that I was Chinese, what would your response be?
I mean, I might be a little surprised, but I would say, good for you. Like, yeah, be who you are.
Begin to swim. Not toward land, strangely, but away from shore, toward the far horizon.
Everyone who isn't strictly male or female is non-binary to one extent or another. Whether they're cisgender, agender, bigender, trigender, polygender, gray gender, gender fluid, or any of the many, 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 many more.
Gradually, strength wanes. Determination ebbs away. And soon the Arctic Sea is dotted with tiny bobbing bodies.
I probably identified as genderqueer for about a year, and then I just had this epiphany, woo! You're trans. You're a guy.
I mean, I don't mean to pick on anybody, but I see a lot of young girls today identifying as non-binary genders based on things like not liking dresses, or not wanting to be a princess, or not liking pink, and things like that. Basically superficial things like personal preferences and fashion choices, as if those comprised your gender. If you're a girl who hates being feminine and hates makeup and doesn't wear dresses and only wears pants, that's fine. I have no issues with that. But I'm not gonna call you they or non-binary. I'm just gonna call you a tomboy. What is it?
But if you call someone a tomboy and she says that's not the right pronoun or term, you might run afoul of the pronoun police. And there can be serious consequences.
Now, this may seem a bit strange to people who think diversity means being diverse. Let me try to clear up the confusion. Diverse people look diverse. That is, they have different color skin and have sex in different ways, and some of them may even be women instead of just regular people. But under leftism, diverse people must not be diverse in important ways, like in their thoughts or beliefs or opinions. In those ways, they must be the same. In lefties, that's what diversity means, being the same.
Is there a difference in your mind between men and women?
No, yes. I mean,
possibly.
And how do you know the difference between men and women?
By what people think they are. So you can't like judge someone just on like their looks.
I don't think there's any one way to really distinguish between a man or a woman, and I don't think it's necessary.
This is insane. Okay, so transgender ideology, yes, it's child abuse because we are gaslighting our children, number one, and that's all children. And in gaslighting these children, many of them, now that they're thoroughly confused, will think that they really are the opposite sex, and they will be sent down a medical pathway.
My pronouns are not preferred. They're not a preference. They are mandatory for interaction with me. Change your language. Like, no one is female bodied, no one is born a girl, no one is any of that. Like, we are assigned genders at birth by doctors who look at us and see certain types of genitalia and decide what our identity will be from there on out.
Biology is reality, not bigotry. We're at a point now in which we know, we have documented 6,500, at least 6,500 genetic differences between men and women. Men and women cannot be treated the same in medicine. Because of these genetic differences, women are more prone to autoimmune diseases, for example, than men are. We must approach our patients in accordance with their biology, not in accordance with their perceptions, which are delusional.
Are doctors transphobic if they refer to their patients who have a penis and they come in for a prostate exam as a male? Is that doctor hate speaking? Is that an act of aggression?
I think if that doctor misgenders their patient, then yeah, they are being transphobic.
So I'm genderqueer, and lately I've been exploring the idea of identifying as trans. Today's episode is about pronouns. I don't want to spend all my time correcting people when they get my gender wrong, because it's not my responsibility, it's yours.
I think that there's a strong case to be made that the modern transgender movement is fascism, that these are little tranny fascists, and I mean it. I mean that they are fascists because you cannot ask questions, you will do as we say.
Just because I may present more femme doesn't mean that I'm any less they, them.
My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and that's a non-negotiable. Misgendering a trans person is an act of violence.
What pronoun should I use?
You should use they, them pronouns. So you saying that you
and
don't
what if I don't?
me,
what if I don't?
If you don't, I would consider that disrespectful, and that's actually an act of violence to misgender a trans
It's an
person,
act of
or
violence.
That is an act of violence to intentionally misgender someone, yeah.
Okay, suppose you're trying not to perpetrate violence against people by making assumptions about their gender, and you have to give a description of a criminal that just ran away.
Come here. Come here.
Air one.
Stop!
Now, the police officer might say this is a short man, but he might not self-identify as short. The police officer might say he's a black man, but he might not self-identify as black. He might say he's Chinese. Might say he's not a man. He might say he's a woman.
If I told you that I was 7 years old, what would your response be?
If you feel 7 at heart, then then so be it. Yeah, good for you.
Oh, come on, people. Stop being such dopey conformist sheep.
If I identify as a 65-year-old, can I draw Social Security? If I say I feel like a Native American, do I qualify for Native scholarships? If I identify as a paraplegic, can I get one of those little handicap decals for my car? The real problem is that people don't want to deal with reality.
And I don't have to act my age. And by not acting my age, I don't have to deal with the reality.
Transgender, someone who identifies as transgender, however, that's not a problem in their body. Gender identity, all identities, they're in our thoughts. Thoughts and feelings, those are not hardwired, they develop, and they may be factually wrong. There's no such thing as a civil right to a mental illness, but that is in fact what we are dealing with the transgender rights movement.
Let's take a look at some of the bizarre directions people are going with self-image and self-identity, wherein they utilize the drag offered by the medical establishment, that is plastic surgery, to physically embody their inner fantasies. This is relevant to identity politics because under identity politics, there really is no limit to the number or kinds of identities which could be asserted as personal or political.
The Bozo Show, starring the world's most famous clown, Bozo. And now he...
Howdy, yeah, drinking Bozo in the morning to all my pals in Camden, New Jersey.
A woman in Norway believes she belongs to a different breed. She claims that she is a cat trapped in a human's body. Interview published on a Norwegian YouTube channel.
Jeg Nano, 7 år. Jeg har vært katt hele livet.
He is totally obsessed with transforming himself into a tiger, and you have to admire his dedication and his fluffy orange tail.
My given name is Stalking Cat, as in sneak up. I can walk with very little or no noise.
So far, undergoing 10 extreme body modification surgeries, which has cost him nearly $200,000.
It's literally been everything I could afford since I started. I'll be happy with where I'm at and where things are going when I reach the point to look like that.
That's up to him. In other words, I'd still accept him. I'd probably be scratching behind the ears then.
48, you're a virgin, right?
Yes.
You've never been on a date. You don't have a job. You just put on a paper dog suit and walk around town, which doesn't seem to me to be a highly productive course in life.
Going around the city, and I kind of can get friends that way too, you know, people who interact with me as a dog. So it's, and dog food doesn't cost that much. So I'm not doing too bad.
Now, you don't really think that you're part dog?
In some way, I have to believe that I am.
Okay.
Things on the dog side and a lot of dog things on the human side.
But I've moved forward now, and I've gone back to being a child. I don't want to be an adult right now, and I don't have to act my age. And by not acting my age, I don't have to deal with the reality.
I am presently the most modified transsexual in the world. I have 8 horns on my forehead. I have had my ears removed, my nose reshaped, most of my teeth removed. I've had the white part, the sclera of my eyeballs permanently stained green. I've had my tongue bifurcated. My whole face is tattooed.
Too many. My next guest has undergone 60 cosmetic procedures to change his appearance, including his latest and most dangerous, which was the removal of 4 of his ribs. Now the so-called human Ken doll, Rodrigo Alves. You match the logo.
You guys look amazing. Thank you. Hey, so you guys are at
major cash on some major plastic. Before we begin, Pixie had 6 of her ribs removed.
180 years ago, a man named Hans Christian Andersen wrote a story about what it looks like when people are cowed or socially pressured into supporting delusional beliefs. Pay attention and notice who is the person brave enough to break the spell and speak common sense.
From the pen of Hans Christian Andersen, the tale of the Emperor's new clothes. Many years ago, on the side of a hill, there stood a great city. Atop the hill, in a splendid castle, lived the Emperor. Everyone marveled. Nobody would confess that he didn't see anything, for that would prove him unfit for his position, or a fool.
Isn't the Emperor's new costume just superb?
And it fits him to perfection.
Then, suddenly, from the crowd...
The Emperor has no clothes on!
In closing, let's go back to Jordan Peterson, one of the most brilliant intellectuals in the world today, how he describes how the intersectionality of identity politics ultimately reduces back to the individualism that Western philosophy has discovered long ago.
The theorists themselves have started to understand that there's an infinite number of dimensions across which people differ, which is actually why the West invented the concept of individuality to begin with. Because if you fractionate groups down to the ultimate atomic level, you end up with the individual, and you have to treat the individual as a unique nexus of factors. And so the logical consequence of intersectionality taken to its final conclusion is the individualism of the West, which I think is extraordinarily funny, although I'm not sure we're gonna make it to the point where we rediscover that. But anyways.
Let's go back to Sam Harris, who tells us how to reason honestly about facts instead of dishonestly through identities.
I'm seeing increasingly more Asian Americans pick up on this Black Lives Matter type rhetoric and the victimhood narrative, and even very privileged Asian Americans wanting to talk about how victimized we are by this tweet from this New York Times editor, never mind if we're professionals or well-educated.
If you're reasoning honestly about facts, then the color of your skin is irrelevant. The religion of your parents is irrelevant. Whether you're gay or straight is irrelevant. Your identity is irrelevant. In fact, If you're talking about reality, its character can't be predicated on who you happen to be. Okay? And the nature of any argument is that its validity doesn't depend on who you are. That's why a good argument should be accepted by others, no matter who they are. And who you are in this case is probably adding a level of emotional engagement with the issue, which would be totally understandable, but would also be unlikely to lead you to think about it more clearly. The facts are whatever they are. And it's not an accident that being disinterested, not uninterested, but disinterested, that is, not being emotionally engaged, usually improves a person's ability to reason about the facts.
In conclusion, identity politics is an extremely superficial philosophical and political ideology which negates the mystery and depth and paradox of human nature. It is a racist ideology replete with double standards that is ever at war with physical and biological realities. It places value on a victim mentality and thus encourages divisiveness and mitigates against our psychological and spiritual development. Essentially, identity politics takes us backwards in history, backward in our collective evolution and consciousness, to the tribalism that existed and still exists in places that have not yet worked out ways for people of different ideologies and values to coexist.